For me, a crucial part of decoding, making sense of the education of Henry Adams is thinking about how education in that book services two different parallel questions. On the one hand, the education of Henry Adams is grappling with this crisis, this transformation of modernity. It's grappling with the sense that the world in which Henry Adams is growing up in is looking incredibly different and strange and new, and it's unclear where this world, this society is headed. This is a characteristic quote from the book where Henry Adams talks about education in this sense. He says, "If he had known enough to state his problem, his education would have been complete at once. Chicago asked in 1893 for the first time the question whether the American people knew where they were driving." End quote, right? So Chicago 1893 is the Chicago World's Fair. This is where America, many Americans, including Henry Adams, were turned on to this miracle of technology, this miracle of electricity, this miracle of this new modern world, with all the new displays and technologies that were on display at the Chicago's World Fair. And so Henry Adams says, this question is, do we know where we're driving? That's the question. That's the fundamental question of this book, the fundamental question of Henry Adams, the question that he's reflecting upon in this book. Adams answered for one that he did not know, but would try to find out. On reflecting sufficiently deeply under the shadow of Richard Hunt's architecture, he decided that the American people probably knew no more than he did, but that they might still be driving or drifting unconsciously to some point in thought, as their solar system was said to be drifting towards some point in space, and that possibly, if relations enough could be observed, this point might be fixed. End quote. And so that's one major sense in which this book explores education, explores trying to understand this modern world. But the other element, and the more personal element, the more biographical element that fills most of the book, at least the first half of the book, is the sense in which Henry Adams' education failed him. The sense in which Henry Adams never got enough from his society, from his schooling. Throughout the book, he excoriates his teachers and the system that he went through, the way in which it was just totally unsuited for his life and times, this changing world. There's some very comical parts, So biographically speaking, Henry Adams, after college, worked as a private secretary. So he followed his father to England, where his father was working as like a diplomat. And Henry Adams talks about how he had to learn how to, of course, take notes, but also interact with all these other people and fit into British society. And all this is completely useless to him. Does nothing to further his career prospects in life. And in this way, he excoriates the education systems and the educators that he experienced along the way. For example, when he's in Germany trying to learn the German language, he spends time in German high schools and elementary schools, and he just is viciously brutal in describing their education system, the torture of memorization, the sense that the schools only recognize this one faculty of memorization and nothing else. But a very characteristic story, a story that stays with me, a criticism of education, which I think I've also heard leveled today. It doesn't feel foreign to us, is Henry Adams describing Harvard College, where he was a student, and later on in the book, towards the end, he actually does some teaching at Harvard, but at the time that we're interested in now, he's just a student at Harvard College, and he talks about the sort of vacuity, the emptiness, the hollowness of the education that he got from Harvard College. Quote, 4 years of Harvard College, if successful, resulted in an autobiographical blank, a mind in which only a watermark had been stamped. The stamp, as such things went, was a good one. The chief wonder of education is that it does not ruin everybody concerned in it, teachers and taught. Sometimes in afterlife, Adams debated whether in fact it had not ruined him and most of his companions. But disappointment apart, Harvard College was probably less hurtful than any other university then in existence. It taught little, and that little ill, but it left the mind open, free from bias, ignorant of facts, but docile. The graduate had few strong prejudices. He knew little, but his mind remained supple, ready to receive knowledge." End quote. A little bit after, he describes how he wins an election upon graduation as class orator, and this is a big shock to him. Quote, "Henry Adams never professed the smallest faith in universities of any kind, either as a boy or man, nor had he the faintest admiration for the university graduate, either in Europe or in America. As a collegian, he was only known apart from his fellows by his habit of standing outside the college. And yet the singular fact remained that this commonplace body of young men chose him repeatedly to express his and their commonplaces. Secretly, of course, the successful candidate flattered himself. They saw in him a representative, the kind of representative they wanted, and he saw in them the most formidable array of judges he could ever meet, like so many mirrors of himself, an infinite reflection of his own shortcomings." Skipping a bit. Unlike the orators at regular commencements, the class day orator stood alone, or had only the poet for rival. What Henry Adams said in his class oration of 1858 he soon forgot, to the last word, nor had it the least value for education. But he naturally remembered what was said of it. He remembered especially one of his eminent uncles or relations remarking that as the work of so young a man, the oration was singularly wanting in enthusiasm. Another comment threw more light on the effect of the college education. One of the elderly gentlemen noticed the orator's perfect self-possession. Self-possession indeed. If Harvard College gave nothing else, it gave calm. End quote. And as we read this biography, what emerges is a real disappointment and a real sense that Henry Adams feels he didn't live to his potential. He feels let down by his education, such that in his mind, there's a real failure to thrive, a real failure to launch from his perspective. Of course, he's the heir of this Adams dynasty. His grandfather and great-grandfather were American presidents. And he sees himself sort of just floundering, being a failure as a writer, failing to be successful writing articles in the newspapers, then eventually sort of failing himself into academia. We might say that Henry Adams was very successful. He wrote a great biography, but in his own mind, there's a real failure there. And interestingly, when you read his political commentary through that lens, you see there's a real bitterness. That's all I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me in this read-along of The Education of Henry Adams. I will be back soon with another video. Thank you for watching.